I'm about to cut the sleeve for the Drama Queen top, and it's fairly long, so just a time-saving way I do it is fold it in half, and then I've made sure that I have the width of the fabric that I need. I've pressed a fold line and I've kind of concertinaed the fabric to have 6 layers there, so that I can just pop that on the fold, and then I can use my rotary cutter to cut 6 layers once. I wanted to show you this sleeve binding. So you've sewn the gathered sleeve on, the hero of this outfit. This is how the edges should look at the bottom, all neatly finished, the layers. And then you've cut a binding. So I use 1.5 inches. It's always inches when it comes to these sort of things for some reason. And then I've used a bias binding maker to fold it into the center and then into half. If you don't have those tools, you can do it manually, or you can buy a ready-made binding, but I love that it's matching. You can do a slightly narrow one if you like, but you'll need to trim off a little bit more of the seam. But I just wanted to show you how to finish the edges neatly. So in the instructions it says to start, I like to start on the garment side, and then you're going to start at the under seam and leave about 2 centimeters, because when you come around to do the full circle, you want to be able to join the piece of the other end of the bias binding to that bit, so that you get a neat finish. And if you've done any sort of quilting, you'll be really familiar with this technique, but if you haven't, this video might help. And then you just you're going to stitch along the same line that you stitched the sleeve to the garment. So you're looking to sort of line up that folded line. It doesn't matter, it doesn't really matter if you don't get it on there, but you're stitching sort of just within that seam line. So you're not stitching into the garment anymore. But the most important bit is that you just leave a little tail so that you can come around and finish that the other end. So you can see that I've nearly come around to where I started, leaving this little tail. And I'm going to sew right up until that point there, but not over it. So, and then I can close the gap up. So I just make sure that I've got that spot. And then I'm going to show you how to close it up. Okay, so this is the start, and you come around here and you've got as close as you can. So then you're just going to lay the 2 pieces together like that. And then stitch across close to where you had stopped joining it to the garment. You're going to stitch across here. So I've stitched across. I'm just going to trim off the excess binding. And then you have a neat join to continue. If you need to just sew that little bit, you can just flatten out that seam. There's probably a few people who've done quilts watching this thinking it should be done on the diagonal, and yes, it probably should be done on the diagonal. And if you wanted to Google that, I'm sure you will find a number of YouTube videos explaining it. I don't think I left enough at the beginning to do that. And then you just fill in the little gap there, and then your binding's ready to flip over and sew to the other side. Now it's just a matter of encasing that seam by folding the binding over. I always find it's a little bit tricky at that seam point. And then you're going to stitch that down, but you're only working in the seam allowance. So you can work, I usually work from this side and just top stitch a few mil in, and I'm just going to be within the seam allowance, not going into the garment. So that's the bound sleeve, and it is a bit of a fiddle and a bit of a to-do, and sometimes you think, oh, what am I doing? It's easier just to overlock it, which is definitely an option if you just run out of puff or you don't feel like you can tackle it. But because the sleeve kind of can flip up sometimes on the shoulder, it's nicer to see this than, you know, an overlock. So it does take an extra, I don't know, 10 minutes by the time you cut the binding and everything, but I'll put that little tutorial, now that there's like a little tutorial for that finish there. There's other ways you can fold both ends as well. Heaps of tutorials that you can Google about finishing binding, but that's just one method to help you along.